The blind sight. I first noticed it on a Wednesday. I was sitting in my car at a red light, staring blankly at the intersection, when I saw a woman standing on the corner. She was pale, almost translucent, dressed in a tattered white dress that billowed despite the still air. Her head was tilted unnaturally to one side, and her eyes, milky and unblinking, locked onto mine. The light turned green. I drove off, heart hammering. But no one else reacted. No gasps, no sideways glances from other drivers. Just stress, I muttered to myself. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I began to suspect something was truly wrong. I was at the grocery store, picking out apples, when I saw a man crouched by the deli counter. His skin was gray and stretched tight over his bones, his fingers clawing at the tiled floor. People walked by, oblivious, their carts squeaking on the linoleum. When I stared too long, he turned to me, his eyes sunken but alight with something cold and hungry. "Help!" he rasped. His voice sounded like it was trapped under layers of dirt. I dropped the apples and left the store. At first, I thought it was a mental breakdown. I booked a therapy session. I avoided mirrors. But the apparitions became more frequent. And worse, they became closer. One night, I woke up to the sensation of someone breathing in my ear. My bedroom was pitch black, but I could make out the faint outline of a figure standing at the foot of my bed. Its head twitched to the side, and then it lunged forward. I screamed. When I turned the lights on, my room was empty. But my bedsheets were damp, and not from sweat. I confided in my friend Mark after one too many sleepless nights. "I think I'm seeing things," I told him, my voice shaking over a cup of coffee. He laughed nervously. "Like ghosts?" "Maybe. They're everywhere, Mark. And no one else sees them." He frowned. "Look, man, you've been working too hard. You're just stressed." I nodded, wanting to believe him. But then I glanced out the cafe window. A figure with hollow eyes was pressed against the glass, staring in. No one else seemed to notice the smudges it left behind as it dragged its face down the pane. It was Mark who convinced me to visit a psychic. He claimed it was for closure. I didn't argue. I was desperate. The psychic, a woman named Miriam, barely touched my hand before recoiling. Her face turned a shade of pale I'd only seen on the things haunting me. "You've been marked," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You see them because they let you. And now that they know you see, they'll come for you." "Who?" I demanded. She didn't answer. She just shoved me out of her shop, locking the door behind me. That night, I stayed awake until the small hours, armed with a kitchen knife. The air felt heavier than usual, and shadows moved in places they shouldn't. And then I saw it. In the corner of my living room, a tall, gaunt figure unfurled itself from the darkness. Its limbs were impossibly long, its joints cracking as it stretched. Its face was smooth, no eyes, no mouth, just a blank slate of skin. It pointed at me, its long fingers trembling. I screamed, throwing the knife. It passed through the figure, embedding itself in the wall. The thing didn't flinch. It just tilted its head, the gesture too deliberate, too aware. "You see us," it whispered. But the voice didn't come from its featureless face. It came from everywhere. Since that night, the world has felt wrong. Colors are duller, sounds more distant. The figures no longer linger at the edges of my vision. They stand beside me, silent sentinels, watching. Waiting. I don't know what they want, but I'm scared to find out. And the worst part? Sometimes, when I look into a mirror, I swear I see them standing just behind me. Smiling. I stopped looking in mirrors after that night. It didn't matter how much I tried to avoid them, though. The reflection of their presence lurked everywhere, in storefront windows, darkened TV screens, even the shine of water in my sink. They were always there. Watching. Smiling. I tried ignoring them at first, pretending they weren't there. But it only seemed to agitate them. The things, whatever they were, became more brazen, their presence more suffocating. I'd see them in the middle of crowded sidewalks, standing motionless while people walked through them as if they weren't real. But they were real. I went back to Miriam's shop one evening, desperate for answers. She didn't open the door this time. Through the glass, I could see her crouched on the floor, a ring of candles around her. She was muttering something, her eyes closed. She didn't even look up as I banged on the window. "Miriam! Please!" I yelled, my voice cracking. Her eyes snapped open, and she scrambled to her feet. "I can't help you!" she shouted through the glass. "They're watching me now, too!" I froze, my stomach twisting. Behind her, the shadows in the shop seemed to stretch and ripple. "They're everywhere," she whispered, backing away. "I'm so sorry." The lights in her shop flickered, and then the candles went out. When they came back on, she was gone. That night, I barricaded myself in my bedroom. I pushed my dresser against the door and shoved a chair beneath the knob. It didn't make me feel any safer. I could feel their presence pressing against the walls, seeping through the cracks. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I hesitated, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello?" I whispered. There was a long pause, and then a voice crackled through the speaker. It was hollow, distant, but unmistakably mine. "You can't hide," it said. I dropped the phone, my heart pounding. The screen stayed lit, but the voice didn't come from the phone anymore. It came from behind me. I didn't dare turn around. My breathing was shallow, my pulse deafening in my ears. But I could feel the weight of eyes on me, the coldness of something standing just inches away. "You see us," the voice repeated, so close now it was as if it were in my head. My body acted before my mind could catch up. I lunged for the window, fumbling with the latch. The cold night air hit me as I climbed onto the roof. I didn't look back. I ran. Barefoot, half-dressed, I ran into the night, my breath clouding the air. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the woods behind my house. The trees felt safer somehow, as though they could shield me from the weight of their stares. But the woods weren't empty. I stumbled into a clearing and collapsed onto the damp earth, gasping for air. The moonlight illuminated the space, and I realized, with a jolt, that I wasn't alone. Figures stood at the edge of the clearing, their forms flickering like static on an old TV. They surrounded me, dozens of them, all staring, all silent. Their features were blurred, their movements jerky and unnatural. I backed away, my hands scrabbling against the dirt. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. One of them stepped forward, its head tilting to the side. When it spoke, its voice echoed like a chorus of whispers. "It's not about what we want. It's about what you've taken." "Taken?" I echoed, confused. "I don't understand." "You see us now," it said. "But you're not supposed to. That sight doesn't belong to you." My heart sank. I didn't ask for this." The figure's head tilted again, an almost human gesture of curiosity. "And yet it's yours." The others began to move closer, their forms blurring and shifting like smoke. I scrambled to my feet, but there was nowhere to run. They were closing in, their whispers growing louder, overlapping, filling my head with incomprehensible words. "Wait!" I screamed. "What do you want me to do?" The closest figure stopped, its form rippling. It reached out, its hand cold and heavy against my chest. "Return what you've stolen," it said. Before I could ask how, the world went black. I woke up in my bedroom, sprawled on the floor. The barricade I'd built was untouched, the dresser still against the door. My phone was on the nightstand, the screen cracked but silent. For a moment, I thought it had been a dream. But then I saw the handprint on my chest, black and faintly glowing, as though it had been burned into my skin. They weren't gone. And they wouldn't stop until I gave them what they wanted. The problem was, I had no idea how. The handprint on my chest burned cold, a reminder that whatever they were, they weren't done with me. I had no idea what I'd taken from them or how to return it, but the message was clear. I was on borrowed time. I spent days trying to piece together what had changed in my life. What moment had triggered this curse? My life wasn't remarkable, no mysterious artifacts, no bloodline steeped in dark magic. I worked a dull office job, lived alone, and had barely spoken to my family in years. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the visions started after one specific event, a car crash 6 months ago. I'd barely survived the accident. The other driver hadn't. The memories came back in flashes. The crumpled hood of my car, the wail of sirens, the flash of white light before I woke up in the hospital. The doctors had called it a miracle. But miracles come with a cost. I needed answers, so I dug into the details of the crash. I requested the police report, scoured the news, anything to learn more about the man who had died. His name was Leonard Briggs. 42 years old. A quiet man, according to his obituary. No family listed. The last thing he had seen before his life ended was me. The night after I learned Leonard's name, I woke to find a figure sitting at the foot of my bed. It wasn't one of the blurry apparitions that had been haunting me. It was Leonard. His face was pale and sunken, his eyes hollow, but it was him. He stared at me, his mouth twitching like he was trying to speak but couldn't find the words. "What do you want?" I whispered. He tilted his head, a gesture I'd come to associate with them. Then, slowly, he raised his hand and pointed to the corner of the room. At first, I saw nothing. But as I squinted into the shadows, something shimmered. It was faint, like a heat mirage, but it was there. A door. I don't know why I got out of bed. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stay under the covers, but my feet moved anyway. Leonard watched silently as I approached the shimmering outline. When I reached out, my hand passed through the door's surface like water. I stepped through. The air on the other side was thick, damp, and cold. I was standing in a dimly lit corridor that stretched endlessly in both directions. The walls were black, pulsing like they were alive. And the whispers were deafening, 1,000 voices overlapping in an indecipherable cacophony. "Where am I?" I called out. The whispering stopped abruptly, leaving an oppressive silence in its place. Then a voice, low and echoing, answered. "This is the Between." The figure that emerged from the darkness wasn't Leonard. It was taller, its form shifting like smoke. Its face was featureless, but I could feel its eyes on me. "You shouldn't be here," it said. "I didn't ask to be here," I replied, my voice trembling. "What is this place?" "This is where they wait," it said. "The ones unseen. The ones unheard. You've stolen their sight, their connection to your world. And now they're lost." "Stolen?" I shook my head. "I don't understand. I didn't do anything." "You lived," the figure said simply. It began to explain. The accident had left me on the brink of death, but something had pulled me back. In doing so, I'd crossed into the Between, however briefly. And when I returned, I'd brought something back with me, their sight. The ability to see the lost. "What do they want from me?" I asked. "To return what you took," the figure replied. "To undo what should never have been. But I don't know how." The figure's form rippled, and for a moment, I thought it would strike me down. Instead, it extended a long, smoke-like arm and placed a finger on my chest. The world shifted. I was back at the crash site, standing in the middle of the wreckage. My car was twisted and broken, steam hissing from the engine. Leonard's car was upside down, the metal frame crushed like paper. But this time, I wasn't alone. The apparitions were everywhere, standing just at the edge of the scene. They watched silently, their hollow eyes fixed on me. I turned and saw Leonard again. This time, he wasn't silent. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But neither should I." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I wasn't supposed to die that night." "You were. But something pulled you back and left me behind." His words hit like a blow. I had stolen his place, his life. The Between had corrected what it could, but my presence in the living world had left a tear, a doorway for them to seep through. "So how do I fix it?" I asked, desperation in my voice. "You give it back," Leonard said. His meaning was clear. My life for theirs. I stood frozen, the weight of his words crushing me. Was it worth it? Could I sacrifice myself to stop the haunting? To give Leonard, and the others, a chance to move on? The apparitions edged closer, their whispers growing louder. Leonard stepped back, his form flickering. You can choose, he said. But not for long. The between began to close, the air growing heavier. Time was slipping away, and I had to decide. What would you have done in my place? I stared at Leonard, my mind spiraling. My life for his? For theirs? It wasn't fair. None of this was fair. And something deep inside me rebelled against the idea that this was the only way. There has to be another option, I said, my voice firming despite my trembling hands. Something else I can do. Leonard's form flickered. He looked almost amused. You think you're special? That you can bargain with them? I don't believe in no-win scenarios, I snapped, though fear twisted my stomach. Tell me what really happened that night. Leonard tilted his head again, the gesture both familiar and alien. You think it matters? It matters to me. The between shifted, the scene of the crash dissolving into darkness. For a moment, I floated weightlessly, my breath caught in my throat. Then, with a jarring thud, I landed in a new memory, not mine, but Leonard's. I stood in a dimly lit room, watching as he sat hunched over a desk, a single bulb casting harsh shadows. Papers and photographs were strewn across the surface. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable: bills, grocery lists, receipts. But as I stepped closer, I realized they were all about me. My name, my face, my life laid out like a road map. What the hell is this? I whispered. Leonard didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. This was a memory, after all, playing out like a film. But I could see the intensity in his face, the way he gripped a pen so tightly it threatened to snap. You weren't just some random guy, I muttered. You were watching me. The air shimmered, and the memories shifted. Now Leonard was in his car, following mine down a rain-slicked road. My taillights glowed faintly ahead of him, blurred by the downpour. He was muttering to himself, his voice low and frantic. Can't keep running, he said. It's now or never. The crash unfolded before me, slow and dreamlike. I saw myself swerving to avoid a fallen branch, my tires losing grip. Leonard's car skidded too, colliding with mine in a sickening crunch of metal and glass. The impact threw both cars into the ditch. But there was more. I watched as Leonard crawled from his wreck, bloodied but alive. He stumbled toward my car, his movements erratic. He wasn't trying to help. He was searching for something. When he reached my driver's side door, he stopped, staring at me through the shattered window. His expression was conflicted. Fear, anger, and something darker. Then the light came. It wasn't headlights or emergency flares. It was something otherworldly, pouring from the sky and engulfing us both. I couldn't describe it, too bright, too vast. Leonard screamed, clutching his head, and then, nothing. He was gone. The memory ended, and I was back in the between. Leonard stood before me, his form rippling like smoke. You were following me, I said, my voice trembling with anger. Why? I had no choice, he replied, his voice devoid of emotion. You don't understand. They sent me. Who? Who sent you? He hesitated, the question hanging heavy in the silence. Finally, he said, the ones who wait. They needed a bridge. Someone to open the way. The apparitions. The between. The haunting. It all clicked into place, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. They used us, I whispered. The crash wasn't an accident. It was a doorway. Leonard nodded. And now it's your turn. The figures around us began to shift, their whispers growing louder. They weren't angry, they were expectant. They had played their part, and now they waited for me to play mine. I won't do it, I said, backing away. I won't help them. Leonard's smile was cold. You don't have a choice. They've marked you. You're already theirs. No, I hissed. There's always a choice. The air trembled, the between collapsing around us. Shadows stretched long and dark, swallowing the light. But in that moment, I felt something I hadn't before: resistance. A power, faint but real, pulsing in the handprint on my chest. It wasn't just a mark. It was a tether, to them, yes, but also to something else. You crossed the between and came back, Leonard said. You don't belong in their world or ours. You're an anomaly. A mistake. And mistakes get erased. But he was wrong. I wasn't a mistake. I was the gap in their system, the flaw they hadn't accounted for. And flaws could be exploited. I closed my eyes, focusing on the tether. The whispers grew louder, angry, but I didn't let go. I reached into the void, pulling at the strands of connection. If they had used me as a bridge, I would use them the same way. The between shuddered, and the shadows recoiled. The figures screamed, their forms dissolving into ash. Leonard lunged at me, his face twisted with rage, but he too began to fade. You don't know what you're doing, he shouted. You'll destroy us all. Maybe, I said. But I'll destroy you first. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my bedroom. The handprint on my chest was gone, the air lighter than it had been in months. The shadows no longer lingered, and the whispers were silent. For the first time, I was alone. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. The between wasn't gone. It was just waiting. And now, I was the one holding the door.